The vast halls of the Galactic Council chamber were bathed in the soft glow of holographic projectors, casting intricate patterns of light across the assembled delegates. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, a palpable weight pressing down upon beings who had ruled entire sectors, who had commanded fleets that darkened the skies of countless worlds. And yet, despite all their power, all their influence, there was an undeniable fear simmering beneath the surface of this gathering. At the center of it all, displayed for every representative to see, were the images, footage of battles that defied all logic, engagements where the expected outcome had been shattered by the actions of a single species. A species that should have been insignificant. A species whose world had only recently been acknowledged as part of the galactic stage. Yet, against all probability, against every prediction and simulation, they had become the most feared beings in the known universe. Vecron of the Davaran Dominion sat rigid in his place, his four-clawed hands tightening into fists as he studied the data before him. He was a warlord, a conqueror whose forces had turned countless civilizations to ash. He had led campaigns that had brought entire planetary systems under the Dominion's rule. And yet, as he listened to the whispers of uncertainty around him, as he observed the way even the mightiest of the galaxy's rulers flinched at the mention of this species, he found himself bristling with disbelief. This is absurd. His voice, a guttural growl laced with irritation, cut through the murmurs of the chamber. Heads turned, eyes of countless species locking onto him as he leaned forward, his mandibles flaring in frustration. You expect me to believe that these creatures, these mammals, are the greatest threat to the galactic order. Their homeworld is barely a Class 4 habitable planet. Their ships are crude compared to our armadas. Their biology is fragile compared to the might of the Dominion. And yet, you cower before them? Silence followed. A deep, unsettling silence, as if the very walls of the chamber were absorbing the weight of his words. Then, after a long pause, a voice emerged from the far side of the hall. A voice calm, measured, yet carrying the gravity of one who had seen the rise and fall of empires. They are feared, Warlord, because they are not bound by the rules we know. The speaker was Counselor Arvin, a member of the Vishari, one of the oldest and most enigmatic races in the galaxy. His many-limbed form shifted slightly as he studied Vecron with an expression that was unreadable, yet carried an unmistakable sense of warning. You believe war is a matter of superior numbers, advanced weaponry, and calculated strategy. That is where your understanding fails. Without another word, Arvin gestured toward the central display, and the chamber dimmed. The holographic projectors hummed softly, shifting to show scenes of battle, conflicts that had become legend, engagements that had reshaped the very foundation of galactic warfare. Vecron watched as footage unfolded before him. He saw fleets, vastly superior in firepower and numbers, utterly devastated by human forces using tactics that should have been reckless, suicidal. He saw ground battles where human soldiers, despite suffering near-catastrophic casualties, refused to retreat. Their lines never truly broke. Even when overwhelmed, they adapted, they improvised, they turned desperate last stands into victories that defied logic. More scenes followed. Human prisoners held in maximum security compounds who, instead of waiting for rescue, systematically dismantled their captors from within, not through brute force, but through manipulation, through deception, through a psychological warfare that turned their jailers into their allies or their victims. Vecron's disbelief grew with every passing moment. This is nonsense, he scoffed, though there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice. Anomalies. Flukes. There is no consistency to what I'm seeing. Arvin remained composed, unshaken. You are looking at patterns, Warlord. His voice carried the certainty of one who had studied the matter far longer than he cared to admit. They do not fight like us. They do not surrender like us. They do not think like us. That is why they are feared. Another voice joined the conversation, a deep reptilian hiss belonging to the Zhrek ambassador, a member of a race known for its once vast empire. The ambassador's scales darkened in a shade that signified discomfort, a rare sight among a species that prided itself on dominance. We attempted to enslave them once, the Zhrek rasped. It was the greatest mistake in our history. Vecron's gaze snapped toward him. A species as young as theirs should have been easy to subjugate. They were, the ambassador admitted. For exactly 3 years, a ripple of tension spread through the chamber. The Shrek inhaled sharply, as if forcing himself to recall memories he would rather leave buried. Their defeat was inevitable. They lacked the technology, the infrastructure, the experience in interstellar warfare. We crushed them without effort. But we underestimated them. He paused, his eyes narrowing. They did not accept their place. They did not break. And instead of fighting us in open battle, they fought us from the inside. They sowed chaos among our ranks. They whispered doubts into the minds of our officers, turned soldiers against their commanders, manipulated our supply chains until our own people were starving while they thrived in the very camps we built to contain them. The murmurs of the chamber grew louder. Fear was no longer just an undertone. It was evident, hanging thick in the air. Vecron, however, was unimpressed. He exhaled sharply, his mandibles curling into a cruel smile. I see only weakness here. Weakness from species who let themselves be undone by primitive creatures. The Dominion does not fear myths. If these humans are truly as dangerous as you say, then I will prove otherwise. A long pause followed. Arvin's expression did not change, but his eyes darkened ever so slightly. And how do you intend to do that, Warlord? Vecron's smile widened. Simple. I will take one of their colonies. I will bring humans before this council as prisoners, and I will break them in front of you all. Then we shall see if your fear is justified. The chamber fell into a heavy silence. Then, softly, the Shrek ambassador spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You have no idea what you are unleashing. But Vecron had already risen from his seat, his mind set on proving the galaxy wrong. He had no way of knowing that he had just signed his own death sentence. The war drums of the Davaran Dominion beat like a slow, methodical pulse across the cold vacuum of space. Vecron's fleet, a vast armada of towering dreadnoughts, swift battlecruisers, and heavily armed troop carriers, cut through the darkness with predatory grace, their hulls adorned with the scars of countless conquered worlds. This was not merely an invasion. It was a demonstration, a calculated message to the entire galaxy that the Dominion did not cower before myths and whispered fears. The target was a human colony on the planet designated as Perseus 9, a world nestled on the war frontier of explored space. By galactic standards, it was unimpressive, a rugged terrestrial world with a breathable atmosphere, sprawling mountain ranges, and vast oceans that mirrored the deep blues of Earth. It had only been settled for a few decades, its infrastructure still growing, its defenses minimal compared to the Dominion's might. Vecron saw no challenge here, no grand battle to be won. It would be an easy conquest, a simple display of force before the Galactic Council. As the fleet approached orbit, Dominion officers moved with disciplined precision across the command decks, their eyes locked on tactical displays that painted a clear picture of the battlefield. The colony's sensor grid had detected their approach, and already, small defensive batteries were coming online, preparing for what little resistance they could muster. Vecron almost laughed at the insignificance of it. The humans had no war fleet here, no reinforcements close enough to make a difference. They were isolated. His second-in-command, a seasoned strategist named Carveth, stood beside him, her expression one of carefully measured certainty. "Shall we broadcast our demand for surrender?" she asked, her talons tapping idly against her control console. "It would be efficient," Vecron scoffed. "No, let them resist. Let them fight back. It will make their humiliation all the more complete." The order was given. Dominion troop carriers descended through the upper atmosphere like a steel rain, their engines roaring as they cut through the thick clouds. Legions of heavily armored soldiers stood in formation within the landing bays, their exoskeletal plating glistening under the red emergency lights. They had trained for this moment, for yet another campaign that would end in overwhelming victory. Then, as the first dropships pierced the lower stratosphere, the colony responded. At first, it was what they expected. Small arms fire from hastily fortified outposts, missile batteries launching in defiance against the incoming wave. Automated defense turrets whirred to life, unleashing torrents of energy bolts that shattered against the Dominion's kinetic shields. It was a futile effort, and the Dominion's return fire quickly silenced the colony's meager defenses. Explosions bloomed like fiery flowers across the landscape, plumes of smoke rising into the sky. And yet, something was wrong. Vecron felt it before he understood it. The resistance was too focused, too controlled. Humans did not fight like this. Newly conquered species fought in desperation, with erratic, panicked movements. They either cowered or threw themselves into suicidal charges, hoping to overwhelm their enemies through sheer numbers. But the humans were not acting like a species on the verge of defeat. They were adapting. The first sign came when the Dominion's forward scouts went silent. Elite soldiers, heavily armed and armored, had been deployed to secure the outskirts of the colony, sweeping through the rocky terrain to eliminate any pockets of resistance. Their reports came in steadily at first. Movement detected. Resistance minimal, civilians evacuating into underground shelters. Then, without warning, the transmissions ceased. Not garbled static, not emergency distress calls. Just silence. Vecron's mandibles clenched as he leaned forward. What happened to them? Carveth frowned, bringing up their location on the holomap. Unknown. Their vital readings went offline within seconds of each other. No signs of an external attack. No explosions. No energy discharges. She hesitated. It's as if they vanished. Vecron's eyes narrowed. Send a recon unit. I want answers. More Dominion soldiers advanced, moving with practiced efficiency, their armor-clad boots crunching against the rocky soil. The silence stretched long and heavy as the recon team approached the last known location of their missing comrades. The terrain was eerily undisturbed. No bodies, no discarded weapons, no signs of struggle. Just the emptiness of the colony's outskirts, bathed in the eerie glow of Perseus IX's twin moons. Then, the first scream echoed through the comms. It was not a battle cry, not a report of enemy engagement. It was a raw, guttural sound of fear, an unnatural, choked gasp that sent a ripple of unease through even the hardened Dominion warriors. Contact! There! The voice cut off in a sharp burst of static. Carveth stiffened, her claws gripping the console. We've lost them! Vecron's mandibles clicked in irritation. Impossible! Humans don't have the capability to jam our transmissions. Another distress call came through, this time from the front lines. The Dominion had pushed deeper into the colony, expecting to seize control within the hour. But the reports were fragmented, confused. Ambush! They let us in. They let us... The message cut out. More voices followed. Reports of Dominion soldiers disappearing into abandoned structures. Supply convoys derailed by precision strikes that crippled their advance. Entire units led into kill zones where explosives tore through their formations with ruthless efficiency. Vecron's mind raced. This was no desperate defense. The humans were controlling the battlefield, manipulating the Dominion's movements with an uncanny understanding of their tactics. They weren't just resisting, they were hunting. Carveth turned to him, her composure beginning to crack. Sir, we need to reconsider our approach, Vecron snarled. No, this is trickery. They are weak, and they will break. They always do. But as the Dominion forces pushed further into the colony, as their ranks thinned with each passing, a moment, as the silence between distress calls stretched longer and longer, a terrible realization began to take root in Vecron's mind. The humans were not fighting to win. They were fighting to make the Dominion bleed. And they were very, very good at it. The battlefield had changed. No longer was it the orderly conquest the Dominion had envisioned. What should have been a straightforward operation had devolved into a slow, creeping nightmare. The humans did not meet them in open combat. They did not charge in desperation, or fall back in fear. They melted into the shadows, striking and vanishing before the Dominion could mount a proper counterattack. They moved with a precision that should have been impossible for a species so young in the galaxy's grand scale, exploiting terrain, ambush points, and even the Dominion's own tactics against them. Vecron stood at the center of the command. Bridge! His clawed hands tightening as another distress call crackled through the speakers. The voice on the other end was barely coherent. thick with fear and confusion. "We're cut off! They—" A deep, guttural sound followed, something unnatural, something wrong. Then silence. Again. The Dominion warriors were not weak. They had conquered countless worlds, subjugated species far older than humanity. They had crushed planetary defenses, shattered war fleets, and burned entire civilizations to the ground. But here, against these humans, they were losing control, and Vecron could feel it slipping through his grasp like sand in a storm. Karveth's voice was tight with tension. Their numbers shouldn't allow for this level of disruption. Our forces outmatch them 10-1. And yet, she trailed off as new reports flashed across the tactical displays. A heavily armed Dominion squad had been advancing through the ruins of a colony district, sweeping for any remaining pockets of resistance. They had been well-trained, armored, in the best combat plating the Dominion had developed, their weapons capable of tearing through fortified positions. And yet, they had been slaughtered. The footage recovered from their armor cams was a jumble of frenzied movement, panicked shouting, the flicker of muzzle flashes in the darkness, then sudden, bone-chilling silence. Vecron studied the images, his mandibles tightening. The bodies had been left in deliberate patterns, spread across the street like a message. Not the work of a panicked, desperate enemy, but a calculated statement. These humans were not merely surviving. They were instilling fear. He turned to Karveth. "We underestimated them," she nodded stiffly. "They know our weaknesses. They know how we fight." That fact alone disturbed him more than he cared to admit. The Dominion prided itself on military superiority, on discipline and control. And yet, the humans fought with something far more terrifying than simple strategy. They fought with an understanding of psychological warfare, with a ruthlessness that was neither reckless nor emotional. They did not waste resources or throw away lives in futile stands. Every strike had meaning. Every movement was a step towards something greater. The realization was solidified when the Dominion tried to deploy aerial reinforcements. Dropships, meant to deliver fresh battalions of soldiers into the heart of the colony, were shot down before they even reached the surface. Not by advanced anti-air defenses, there were none. The humans had repurposed industrial equipment, hacked into the colony's old mining platforms to turn them into makeshift artillery. Crude, imprecise, but devastatingly effective. It was an adaptation so fast, so efficient, that it sent a ripple of unease through the Dominion ranks. Then came the whisper of a new tactic, one the Dominion had never encountered before. The captured Dominion squads that had vanished without a trace had not all been killed. Some had been taken, and when they were found, their armor still intact, their weapons still in hand, the truth became horrifyingly clear. Their minds had been shattered. They were alive, breathing, but empty. Warriors who had once been unshakable in battle now sat motionless, unresponsive, their eyes blank. The humans had broken them without lifting a weapon. No interrogation scars, no signs of torture. Just silence. The psychological toll on the Dominion forces was immediate. They began hesitating at every darkened doorway, pausing before entering open courtyards. Their battle formations grew tighter, their movements more rigid. They were warriors, trained for war. But this was something else. This was a campaign that defied the rules of conquest. Vecron had enough. "Burn it." Karveth hesitated. "Sir?" He turned to her, his eyes dark with fury. "The colony. Level it. Scorched earth. If we cannot claim it, we will erase it." The order was given, and the Dominion's warships angled their weapons toward the planet below. Massive cannons hummed with energy, preparing to unleash devastation upon the surface. The humans had fought well, but in the end, no amount of strategy or ruthlessness could survive orbital bombardment. It was over. Or so he thought. As the first blasts rained down, striking the abandoned outskirts of the colony, an urgent alarm blared across the Dominion fleet. Something was coming. Something fast. Multiple contacts on an intercept course. Karveth's voice wavered. "Sir!" "Incoming human vessels." Vecron's blood chilled. They weren't supposed to have warships here. The Dominion had made sure of that before the invasion. There was no fleet stationed near Perseus 9, no nearby reinforcements. But the readings were undeniable. The signatures were human, and they were closing in fast. The void of space trembled as the human vessels broke through the darkness, their hulls cutting through the vast emptiness like spectral hunters emerging from the abyss. Vecron's breath hitched as he studied the tactical display. These were not standard human patrol ships, nor were they the crude planetary defense vessels the Dominion had encountered in earlier skirmishes. These ships bore no conventional military insignia, no grand emblems of an established fleet. Their hulls were dark, nearly featureless, and as they accelerated toward the Dominion's formation, their attack patterns were erratic, deliberate, but unpredictable, like a predator toying with its prey before striking the killing blow. Dominion warships shifted their positions, bracing for the engagement. The fleet had the advantage. Larger vessels, heavier weaponry, superior firepower. The logical outcome should have been annihilation. The human ships wiped from existence before they even had a chance to fight. But logic no longer dictated this battle. The first exchange of fire came swift and brutal. A Dominion destroyer unleashed a barrage of plasma lances, the shots streaking through the vacuum, aiming to cut down the leading human craft before it could maneuver into range. But the humans had already anticipated the attack. Their ships twisted, rotated mid-flight in ways that defied standard combat doctrine. They wove through the barrage like specters slipping between the folds of space, the Dominion's carefully calculated firing solutions rendered useless in mere seconds. Then the retaliation came, not in a traditional exchange of firepower, but in something far more insidious. A blackout. Vecron's command consoles flickered. The holographic displays wavered as systems began failing one by one. Communications distorted, radar feeds glitched, and for a brief, horrifying moment, half the Dominion fleet went blind. The enemy had disabled their targeting systems, not through brute force, but through something far worse, electronic warfare so advanced that it bypassed their defenses like a knife through soft flesh. Carveth's voice was sharp with alarm. "They've breached our systems. We can't lock onto them." That was when the killing began. The first Dominion cruiser never saw the attack coming. A human vessel darted beneath its hull, firing a series of precisely aimed kinetic slugs directly into its structural weak points. The projectiles tore through the ship's armor like paper, igniting a chain reaction of internal explosions. The warship groaned, its hull bending under the sudden force, before its core reactor detonated in a brilliant eruption of fire and debris. Another ship fell next, then another. The Dominion, for all its military might, had grown complacent in its conquests. They had relied on sheer power, on overwhelming numbers and advanced technology. But these humans fought differently. They didn't rely on superior warships. They relied on adaptability, on the ability to strike with absolute precision and then disappear into the void before the enemy could react. They were not fighting a battle. They were executing a hunt. Vecron's mandibles clicked as he turned to his officers. "Pull back. Regroup with the heavy cruisers and focus fire on the lead human vessel." But the order had come too late. A new transmission crackled through the command deck, overriding Dominion frequencies. It was not a demand for surrender. It was not a threat. It was a message, cold, devoid of emotion, carrying only a simple declaration. "You are not the hunters here." The voice was human, but it carried something deeper. A weight that settled in Vecron's chest like a phantom claw. Then the true horror began. Dominion ships began losing control of their own weapon systems. Internal defenses turned against their crews, automated turrets suddenly pivoting and firing upon their own ranks. Airlocks cycled open at random, venting entire squads into the void before emergency bulkheads could engage. Engines failed without warning, leaving ships adrift, helpless in the dark. Panic spread like wildfire. Warriors, trained for battle, found themselves powerless against an enemy they could not predict. This was not war. This was a dismantling. And then, the human ships vanished. One moment, they were there, weaving between Dominion vessels like phantoms of death. The next, they were gone, fading into the blackness of space as if they had never existed. Silence fell upon the Dominion fleet, broken only by the distant sounds of their own damaged ships struggling to recover. Carveth whispered what they were all thinking. They could have destroyed us. Vecran clenched his fists, his mind racing. She was right. The humans had them at their mercy. They could have obliterated the entire Dominion fleet, wiped them from existence. Instead, they had chosen to leave them alive, broken, humiliated, and carrying a message back to their empire. A warning. The Dominion fleet limped away from the battlefield, its formation shattered, its warriors silenced by the weight of what had transpired. Vecran stood rigid at the command deck, his mind cycling through the events that had unfolded like a nightmare given form. This was not a defeat in the traditional sense. It was something far worse. A demonstration. A calculated, deliberate display of power designed not to destroy, but to instill something more corrosive than death itself: fear. The journey back to Dominion space was long and filled with uneasy silence. The few ships that remained intact carried the wounded, their systems barely functioning after the assault. Every warrior on board knew they were returning not as victors, but as harbingers of grim news. The High Command would demand explanations, strategies, countermeasures. Yet, how did one prepare for an enemy that fought like shadows in the dark, slipping through the cracks of logic and technology with terrifying ease? When Vecran finally stood before the Grand Conclave, the chamber was thick with tension. The gathered warlords and strategists had reviewed the combat logs, had watched the impossible unfold in cold, undeniable recordings. Some refused to believe what they saw. Others were silent, knowing that denial was a luxury they could no longer afford. "This cannot stand," one of the high warlords snarled, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "These humans, they wield tricks and cowardice, not true power. A full Dominion war campaign will crush them." Vecran turned his gaze toward the warlord, his voice sharper than steel. "And if they do not let us fight that campaign?" Murmurs spread through the chamber. Vecran continued, his words deliberate. "We assume they will engage as we do, ship to ship, fleet to fleet. But we are thinking like conquerors, not survivors. The humans are not bound by the traditions of war we understand. They have already proven they do not need to win through brute force. They dismantled us without firing a single superweapon. They used our own systems against us, and they left us alive to spread their message." A silence settled over the room, heavy with the weight of the realization. The humans had let them return, had given them a warning, had chosen fear as their first and most devastating weapon. The Dominion could not afford to ignore such a challenge. The High Command ordered the construction of new warships, ships specifically designed to counter human interference, with redundancies upon redundancies to prevent their systems from being hijacked again. Every Dominion sector was placed on high alert, patrols doubled, military installations reinforced. The Empire braced for war. Yet as time passed, the humans did not come. No fleets arrived, no invasions launched. The Dominion's fleets patrolled the stars, seeking out signs of human presence, but they found nothing. Not a trace of the enemy that had so thoroughly humiliated them. And in that absence, the fear only grew. Warriors whispered of ghost ships, lurking just beyond their scanners. Captains flinched at sensor glitches, fearing another blackout. The paranoia spread through the ranks like a slow-acting poison, eroding the iron discipline that had once defined the Dominion's forces. Then, the disappearances began. It started with isolated outposts, small, insignificant colonies that went dark without a trace. At first, the Dominion assumed pirate raids, internal malfunctions, or even natural disasters. But then it happened again, and again. Entire ships vanished from their patrol routes. No distress signals, no signs of struggle, just silence. The few that were found were little more than derelicts, their crews missing, their systems wiped clean of any records. The High Command convened in a state of desperation. "They are testing us," one of the warlords growled, his claws digging into the stone table. "They are eroding our strength, not with weapons, but with fear itself." Vecran spoke then, his voice steady despite the dread tightening in his chest. "They are not testing us. They are hunting us." The realization settled over the chamber like a suffocating weight. The Dominion had prepared for battle, but the humans had never intended to fight them in open war. They were unmaking them from the shadows, unraveling their empire piece by piece. And the worst part? No one knew when the next strike would come. The Dominion was crumbling from within, not through the force of weapons, but through the relentless, calculated unraveling of its foundation. Fear had seeped into every level of their once proud empire, from the highest warlords to the lowest foot soldiers. Every patrol was laced with suspicion. Every transmission was a potential trap. The mighty fleets that had once swept across the galaxy with unwavering confidence now moved hesitantly, second-guessing their own strategies, always looking over their shoulders for enemies they could not see. The Dominion's most dangerous foe was no longer a physical threat. It was the uncertainty that had been planted deep within them. The reports grew worse. Entire battalions stationed on key fortress worlds found themselves locked out of their own weapon systems. Defense grids went dark just as enemy signals appeared on the periphery, only for the signals to vanish before an attack ever came. Their greatest strongholds, thought to be impenetrable, became prisons of their own making as airlocks refused to open, as supply caches self-destructed before they could be accessed. Food shipments were delayed, fuel reserves drained overnight. The infrastructure that held the Dominion together was being sliced apart by an invisible hand. Then came the broadcasts. At first, they were dismissed as tricks. Hacked signals intercepted by Dominion command, a mere annoyance in the grand scheme of war. But the frequency of these intrusions increased. They played across every warship's bridge, every colony's public announcement system, even deep within the chambers of the High Command itself. The message was always the same. A simple, distorted voice that spoke in their native tongue, yet carried an eerie artificial cadence. You are not in control. That was all. Nothing more. No demands, no threats. Just a single, chilling reminder that resonated through every level of their civilization. The implication was far worse than any ultimatum. The humans weren't just defeating them. They were proving that the Dominion's authority, the very foundation of their rule, was an illusion. They did not govern their own empire. Someone else did. Someone they couldn't see. Someone they couldn't predict. Someone who had already infiltrated the very core of their existence. Paranoia reached a breaking point. The High Command issued immediate lockdown orders across all sectors, recalling thousands of warships to form defensive perimeters around key worlds. Warlords turned against one another, accusing each other of being compromised. Executions became rampant. Any officer who so much as hesitated at their post was accused of collaboration and purged. Fear had done what no enemy armada ever could. It had turned the Dominion against itself. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the attacks ceased. No more intercepted transmissions, no more disappearing ships, no more ghostly messages whispering through their networks. The humans vanished from the battlefield, leaving behind only silence and the devastation they had wrought. The Dominion remained standing, but it was not the same empire that had once ruled with absolute certainty. Its fleets were fractured, its leaders desperate, its people haunted by the knowledge that they were no longer the hunters, but the hunted. In the depths of space, aboard a nameless vessel cloaked from even the most advanced scanners, the humans watched. Their war had never been about conquest. It had never been about destruction. It had been about sending a message, one that was now burned into the psyche of an entire species. A message that echoed through every Dominion star system, in every whispered rumor, in every sleepless night spent wondering when the next strike might come. The most feared force in the galaxy was not the one with the largest fleet or the most devastating weapons. It was the one that could turn fear itself into a weapon more powerful than any battleship, more corrosive than any superweapon. And now, the Dominion knew exactly why humanity was to be feared. The Dominion was no longer the unshakable force it had once been. The cracks in its foundation had been exposed, and though they still controlled vast swaths of the galaxy, they no longer moved with certainty. Every battle plan, every strategic deployment, every decision was made under the shadow of doubt. Their enemies had shown them something far worse than destruction. They had shown them their own vulnerability, and that was something the Dominion had never accounted for. In the weeks following the human withdrawal, the Dominion warlords struggled to re-establish order. There were no signs of further sabotage, no new broadcasts, no ghostly whispers within their networks. But the silence was not a relief. It was suffocating. Every day that passed without incident only deepened their paranoia. Had the humans truly left? Or were they simply waiting, watching, preparing for something even worse? The uncertainty gnawed at them like a festering wound, one that no show of force could heal. High Command tried to suppress the rumors, issuing decree after decree that the war was still theirs to win, that the enemy had retreated out of fear. But their words rang hollow. Too much had happened. Too many unexplained failures, too many disappearances, too many instances of sheer, inexplicable terror that no fleet, no empire, no show of strength could undo. The Dominion's enemies, once scattered and disorganized, had begun to rise. Formerly subjugated civilizations that had spent decades under Dominion rule now saw the cracks in their oppressors' armor. Rebellions ignited like wildfire. Insurgencies, that would have been crushed without hesitation mere months ago now, gained ground with shocking speed. But the worst of it all was the Dominion's own people, their soldiers, their officers, their citizens. They had seen something they could never unsee. They had looked into the abyss of human warfare, and they had not found an enemy they could fight. They had found an enemy that had already won before the first shot was ever fired, an enemy that had rewritten the very rules of war itself. Within the vast halls of the Dominion's core world, in the deepest recesses of their fortified capital, the Supreme Warlord sat in silence. His advisors spoke cautiously, choosing their words with care. He had been the architect of war for decades, leading campaigns that had wiped entire civilizations from the stars. But for the first time in his long and merciless reign, he felt something alien, something unnatural clawing at his mind. Doubt. He stared at the holomap before him, at the blinking indicators of his scattered fleets, at the ever-growing reports of internal collapse. He had spent his life believing in absolute dominance, in the power of overwhelming force, in the certainty of victory. But the humans had shown him the truth. War was not won through firepower alone. It was won through perception, through strategy, through the slow and deliberate corrosion of an enemy's mind, until they could no longer tell the difference between reality and fear. He exhaled slowly, his hands tightening into fists. He would never say it aloud. He would never admit it to his warlords, to his commanders, to the billions who still looked to him for guidance. But deep in the depths of his being, beneath layers of defiance and arrogance, a single thought formed, one that refused to be ignored. The Dominion was doomed. The war never ended with a final battle. There was no grand confrontation, no moment of decisive victory or crushing defeat. The Dominion, once the most feared force in the galaxy, did not fall with fire and ruin. It simply withered away. The seeds of doubt the humans had planted had taken root, spreading like an unstoppable virus through the ranks of their soldiers, their commanders, their people. Fear had become a sickness, and no empire could rule when its own foundations were crumbling beneath it. Civilizations that had once cowered in the Dominion's shadow rose up in defiance. Their fleets, battered and outmatched for centuries, suddenly found themselves pushing forward, claiming ground that had been unshakable for generations. The Dominion fought back, of course. They launched counterattacks, deployed fleets of overwhelming force, rained fire upon rebellious worlds. But it was different now. Their soldiers hesitated. Their commanders second-guessed. Their warships moved through space not as an unstoppable armada, but as a fleet weighed down by paranoia and uncertainty. Every dark corner of the void, every encrypted transmission, every flicker of movement outside their sensors whispered a terrifying question. Was this another human trick? Was this another mind game, another unseen attack waiting to unravel them from within? The Supreme Warlord, once a figure of absolute dominance, became reclusive. He issued commands from deeper and deeper within the fortified layers of his citadel, shielding himself from threats real and imagined. He trusted no one. His inner circle dwindled, either dismissed as potential human spies or executed for perceived betrayal. His warlords, once the vanguard of Dominion might, turned on one another in desperate power struggles. They each believed the others had already fallen under human influence, that they were puppets in some unseen game. Their unity collapsed, their strength eroded, and without their cohesion, the Dominion's enemies no longer feared them. The humans never returned. They never sent another fleet, never fired another shot, never broadcast another message. They didn't need to. Their war had been fought on a different battlefield, one beyond the reach of weapons and fleets. They had turned the Dominion's greatest strength, their reputation of fear, against them. And in doing so, they had done something no civilization in the galaxy had ever managed. They had broken them without ever needing to destroy them. Years passed. The Dominion's territories fractured, breaking into splintered warlord states, each vying for dominance over the ruins of what had once been the greatest power in the galaxy. The Supreme Warlord disappeared, his fate unknown, whispered about in rumors that held no real answers. Some said he had fled into deep space, seeking sanctuary beyond the reach of human shadows. Others claimed he had simply vanished, consumed, by the very fear he had once wielded against others. But the truth no longer mattered. The Dominion was no more. Across the galaxy, stories of the war spread. Tales of the unseen war, of the species that had brought an empire to its knees without ever truly fighting. Some called it a myth, an exaggerated legend meant to frighten war-hungry civilizations into submission. Others spoke of it in hushed voices, fearful that even speaking of the humans would invite their silent wrath. But one thing was certain. No empire, no warlord, no rising power ever dared to challenge them again. For in the vast and endless dark of space, there are many ways to wage war. But only one species had ever mastered the art of making their enemies defeat themselves. And that, more than any weapon, more than any technology, was why they were the most feared in the galaxy. The story ends, but the legend endures.